My interview with Representative Liz Thompson and Advocate Alexandria Taylor will air in about 10 minutes. The 2-week trial of armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is underway, and the country's eyes are focused on Santa Fe. Gutierrez-Reed is charged with involuntary manslaughter in the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, as well as evidence tampering. She could face up to 3 years in prison if convicted on both counts. Numerous questions remain in this case, chief among them being who brought live ammunition onto the set. To discuss all of this and more, executive producer Jeff Proctor hosts a virtual discussion with attorney Ahmad Assad and journalist Julia Goldberg.
Thank you, Lou. Joining us on screen today are Julia Goldberg, my former colleague at the Santa Fe Reporter, and attorney Ahmad Assad. Thank you both for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
As Lou mentioned, the trial for Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer for the film Rust, has begun. It's the first time a jury will weigh in on the deadly shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. Julia, as briefly as you can, why did it take more than 2 years to get to this point, and what are the big questions at the center of this trial?
Well, I'll start with the second first. The big question is, how did live ammo get onto the Rust set, and who should be held accountable for live ammo in the gun that was fired that killed cinematographer Halyna Hutchins? I think why it took so long has a lot to do with the judicial process as it's played out. The First Judicial District Attorney's Office has changed counsel in the course of the case. There's been a lot of motions. There's been a motion to dismiss. There's been plea deals. There's been just about everything that could happen in a case seems to have happened in this case, and it's taken this long to bring the first case to trial. And I'm very curious about the strategy of bringing Hannah Gutierrez to trial in advance of Alec Baldwin. I'm wondering if we sort of get a preview of that case and whether or not that will hurt prosecutors. But I think probably Ahmad is the better person to answer that than me.
I'm curious about the strategy too, and we'll certainly get there in a moment. But let's break down the case a little bit against Gutierrez-Reed. She's been charged with involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence. Ahmad, let's try to take them one at a time and as quickly as we can. Involuntary manslaughter is one of those crimes that makes a lot of people a bit nervous. What are the elements prosecutors must prove, and how does intent play into this one?
We've heard two theories with regards to involuntary manslaughter. And, normally people traditionally want to affiliate a homicide case or a charge or murder with some form of intent. This is not a specific intent crime, and certainly is not a strict liability. So we're not talking about the intent in the traditional notion that we understand. Generally speaking, you need negligence as a standard associated with the main count, the first count, and the alternative, it's more of a reckless standard. Essentially, general intent, if you will, and the elements basically have to, in the first charge, have to do with negligent use of a deadly weapon. Some refer to it as like the misdemeanor manslaughter rule. And then the second one requires a reckless or willful disregard for the safety of others, this due caution and circumspection component of the second alternative to involuntary manslaughter. So don't think of intent in the same way, but there is a general intent required. And those are shown by way of either negligence or reckless behavior.
Gotcha. So a little bit of a vaguer standard. Let's move to that evidence tampering charge. That one's a bit more straightforward, but in this case, there's a bit of a wrinkle on that one, right?
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, no testing has been done. The elements are required that these are essentially narcotics, factually speaking with regards to the specific charge against Ms. Gutierrez-Reed. They have to be narcotics, and she has to have done them in a way. She has to basically have given off this so-called bag of drugs in order to evade or hide the evidence so that a future prosecution against her would not be forthcoming. And there's going to be some difficulty as we talk further with regards to the state's ability, I think, to prove that case.
Gotcha.
That charge.
Let's talk about workplace safety a little bit. That's an issue that's come up again and again in this case. An April 2022 OSHA report found that the Rust production violated numerous industry safety protocols, including documented gun safety complaints. Prosecutors tried to keep jurors from seeing this report, but the judge shot down that request. Ahmad, let's stay with you on this one. How will that report weigh on a jury when considering the charges?
As I understand it, the judge's ruling with regards to that report, and it will be favorable to the defendant, to Ms. Gutierrez-Reed, as we move forward to it, will be played before the jury in the course of the expert testimony. Experts can rely on hearsay. They can rely on outside information in rendering opinions that they share with the jury to help the jury unravel and understand the circumstance. That OSHA finding of the scene and the set being a chaotic set from the get-go is going to play a very important role in this idea that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed could not have performed her functions as a weapons specialist because she lacked the control of a very, very chaotic set, which is more in control of management rather than her own particular duties.
Julia, let's talk about workplace safety outside the context of a criminal trial for a second. This shooting has sparked a conversation, I think, about safety standards in film productions here in New Mexico as well as Hollywood in general. Is that your sense? Has this been a conversation starter in that way?
Yes and no, Jeff. I mean, I think not as much as it might have seemed in the immediate aftermath. And I would attribute that to a few things. One, I think the writer and actors strike kind of took the wind out of this being the central way in which people were thinking about the conditions for people who work in this industry. And then, as you know, or as I assume you know, our elected officials were not very loud about the Rust incident. There were two bills introduced in 2023 that would have required some kind of gun safety training for people on sets. They both died in the session. They didn't get much of a hearing. We haven't heard much from the state film office. We haven't heard much from the governor. We haven't heard much from the Santa Fe film office. California's governor did sign a fairly sweeping safety bill, but we haven't really, no one's made it a priority in New Mexico that I've seen.
Okay, for just a moment here at the end of the segment, Ahmad, let's pivot to Baldwin just a bit. Of course, charges against him were dismissed last April, but special prosecutors Carrie Morrissey and Jason Lewis kept pushing. A grand jury indicted him also on a charge of involuntary manslaughter last month. How could the outcome of the Gutierrez-Reed trial impact the prosecution against Alec Baldwin?
I think in either context, the Alec Baldwin team and Alec Baldwin win. They have a vast advantage over seeing the roadmap essentially into their own case by viewing the case against Ms. Gutierrez-Reed. If she gets convicted, I think there is going to be this idea that responsibility was laid by a jury to the proper person and that it should end there. If she's acquitted, it just weakens the prosecution against Mr. Baldwin in a future trial. So in both instances, and the idea that it's being tried before his, are all benefits to the Baldwin team and Mr. Baldwin.
Really quickly, one last question on this. I'd like to kind of cleave apart the two cases a little bit. In the case of Baldwin, of course, he was the one holding the gun at the time that Ms. Hutchins was shot. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was not. Yet they are charged with the same crime. How do we make heads or tails of that?
There is, by the way, there is a jury instruction with regards to causation that has been proposed by the defense team in terms of this case in Ms. Gutierrez-Reed. The issue against the case against Ms. Gutierrez-Reed has to do with her handling overall. The idea that she's responsible for handling that dangerous weapon, and in so doing, either acted or omitted to act in a way that kept everybody safe and ensured that that prop, once given to the chain of people, ultimately to Mr. Baldwin, should have been a prop that was safe to use. In terms of Mr. Baldwin, he's directly involved in the actual shooting. He's the one that handled the weapon itself upon the shooting that resulted in the death of Ms. Hutchins. So distinct features, but there is an element that is shared at some point. Sorry.
But the defense, Baldwin's lawyers last week indicated that they are going to argue against him being held culpable as a producer in any way, right? Okay.
Right. And I think the producer aspect of it, I think it's been overplayed with regards to the charge here. There's a number of reasons why somebody would be a producer or co-producer and doesn't necessarily translate into the type of duty or negligence that is accused of specifically handling the weapon in the way that it was shot. And I think more specifically, I think the statement about pulling the trigger, not pulling the trigger, is going to play the bigger role. And that only come into play with regards to Mr. Baldwin's interview and releasing that information, which I think was a big mistake.
Right. Interesting, that producer bit in the civil context, maybe less so in the criminal. Thanks again to you two. We'll return to this group in about 15 minutes to discuss the case more deeply against Alec Baldwin and the media circus surrounding it all.